In the summer of 1518, a woman named Frau Troffea stepped into a narrow street in Strasbourg and began to dance. There was no music. She didn't stop. She danced through the day, through the night, into the next morning. Her feet bled, her legs shook, her eyes rolled back. She still didn't stop. Within a week, 34 people had joined her. Within a month, the number hit 400. They danced in the streets. They danced in the churches. They danced until their hearts gave out. This wasn't a celebration. This wasn't a festival. This was one of the most terrifying, inexplicable mass events in recorded history, and nobody to this day fully understands why it happened. To understand what happened in Strasbourg in 1518, you have to understand the world it happened in. Strasbourg was a prosperous city, but prosperity is a thin mask. Beneath it, the city was rotting. The years leading up to 1518 had been catastrophic. Devastating famines had swept through the region. Crops failed. Bread prices collapsed families. The poor were starving in the streets while plague swept through neighborhoods indiscriminately. The city's residents believed, genuinely believed, that God was punishing them. The medieval mind didn't separate the physical from the spiritual. Sickness was sin. Famine was divine wrath. Disaster was a message. And in this environment of total desperation, the people of Strasbourg had one particular fear above all others: Saint Vitus. Saint Vitus was the patron saint of epileptics and those who suffered from nervous disorders. But he was also believed to curse those who offended him, inflicting upon them an unstoppable, frenzied, uncontrollable dancing. The curse was well known. It had a name: Chorea Sancti Viti, the dance of Saint Vitus. The people of Strasbourg were afraid of him, and then Frau Troffea began to dance. Nobody knows exactly what caused Frau Troffea to start dancing on that July day in 1518. What historians do know is that she danced for 6 days straight without stopping, without any apparent desire to stop. She was eventually taken to a shrine of Saint Vitus, hoping for relief. It didn't help, and by the time she disappeared from the historical record, dozens had joined her. The dancing spread like fire through dry wood. By late July, the city's guild records documented 34 dancers. By August, the number had swelled to 400. The streets of Strasbourg were choked with people in states of frenzied, convulsive, unstoppable movement. Eyewitness accounts describe scenes almost impossible to process. Men and women screaming as they danced, begging onlookers to help them stop, their feet bloody and raw, their faces twisted in agony. Some collapsed. Some had strokes. Some died. The city council, desperately trying to manage the crisis, made a catastrophic decision. They believed that the only cure for compulsive dancing was more dancing. They hired musicians. They cleared the guild halls and the markets. They brought in professional dancers to accompany the afflicted. They built a wooden stage in the horse market. They were essentially feeding the plague. The dancing didn't stop. It got worse. When the dance-it-out strategy predictably failed, the city council turned to the physicians. The doctors of Strasbourg examined the dancers and reached a diagnosis that tells us everything about 16th century medicine. Hot blood, they declared. The victims were suffering from an excess of hot blood in the brain, a concept rooted in ancient Galenic medicine that divided all illness into imbalances of the 4 humors. The treatment was obvious: bleed the patients to reduce their blood and prevent them from resting, because rest would allow the hot blood to pool and cause permanent madness. In other words, keep them dancing. The musicians played on. The dancers were not allowed to rest. Guards were posted to make sure nobody stopped. People died. Not metaphorically, literally died. Historians estimate that at the peak of the plague, several people were dying per day from heart attacks, strokes, and sheer physical exhaustion. The city council began to panic. They banned music. They banned public gatherings. They sent the dancers, those still alive, on a religious pilgrimage to the shrine of Saint Vitus in Saverne. They shut down the dance halls. By September, it was over. The dancing plague of 1518 simply stopped. No cure, no official explanation, just silence. And several hundred people traumatized, injured, or dead. This is where history gets genuinely fascinating, because no one fully agrees. The most widely accepted modern explanation comes from historian John Waller, who spent years studying the primary sources. His conclusion? Mass psychogenic illness, what we'd today call mass hysteria. But that label is deceptively simple. Mass hysteria isn't faking. It's not theater. It's a real, involuntary neurological phenomenon in which extreme psychological stress causes genuine physical symptoms that spread through social contagion. And the conditions in Strasbourg in 1518 were a perfect incubator. The famine, the plague, the religious terror, the specific, well-known fear of St. Vitus. These weren't background details. They were loaded triggers. In a community already pushed to the edge of mental endurance, one person's breakdown could ignite a collective one. The belief itself was weaponized. If you already feared that St. Vitus could make you dance against your will, seeing someone else do it didn't reassure you. It terrified you. And terror, in a body already flooded with cortisol and starvation hormones, could generate exactly the kind of neurological short circuit that made the dancing begin. There's a secondary theory, ergotism. Ergot is a fungal mold that grows on rye in wet conditions common in 1518 Europe. Ergot contains compounds chemically similar to LSD and can cause convulsions, hallucinations, and involuntary muscle movements. A bad rye harvest could have poisoned entire neighborhoods simultaneously. But Waller points out that ergotism victims typically can't walk, let alone dance for days. The mass psychogenic model fits better. Either way, something extraordinary happened in Strasbourg. Something that killed people, baffled authorities, and has never been fully explained. The dancing plague of 1518 wasn't the first event of its kind, and it wasn't the last. Similar outbreaks had been documented across medieval Europe for centuries. In 1374, a mass dancing event swept through the Rhine Valley, affecting thousands across multiple cities. In 1237, a group of children in Erfurt reportedly danced themselves into convulsions on a journey to a nearby town. These events were terrifying enough to leave permanent marks on European culture. Some historians believe the Pied Piper legend, children led away by a mysterious musician, may have roots in one of these dancing plague events. The image of a musician leading entranced followers to their destruction is too specific to be purely invented, and the phenomenon didn't die with the Middle Ages. In 1962, at a girls' school in Tanganyika, modern-day Tanzania, an outbreak of uncontrollable laughter spread through the student population and lasted for months. Schools were closed. The epidemic spread to neighboring villages. In 2011, in Leroy, New York, a cluster of teenage girls at a high school began experiencing involuntary twitching, tics, and verbal outbursts, symptoms that spread through the school despite no identifiable physical cause. The diagnostic label changed: mass psychogenic illness, conversion disorder, but the phenomenon was the same. Human beings, under sufficient collective stress, can generate shared physical symptoms that are entirely real, entirely involuntary, and entirely inexplicable by conventional medicine. Frau Troffea didn't choose to dance. The 400 who joined her didn't choose to dance. They were caught in something larger than any of them, a collective unraveling, born from famine and plague and terror and faith. The dancing plague of 1518 is one of history's most disturbing reminders of how fragile the line is between the body and the mind, and how catastrophically that line can blur when an entire community reaches its breaking point. We like to think we're immune to this. We have medicine, we have science, we have rational frameworks. But mass psychogenic events still happen, They happen in schools, in factories, in online communities. The triggers change. The symptoms change. The underlying mechanism, collective human minds under pressure, pulling each other toward the edge, that hasn't changed at all. Frau Troffea eventually stopped dancing. History doesn't tell us what became of her. But for 6 weeks in the summer of 1518, an entire city danced itself to death, and no one could explain why. If you made it this far, you clearly love history that actually happened and is somehow more bizarre than anything fiction could invent. Subscribe. We do this every week.